virtual town hall since we entered into this pandemic. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to be together, but so many of you are actually taking advantage of the convenience of watching these town halls online live or watching the recordings after the fact. And it is relevant that 6.5 months ago, our very first virtual town hall was on the issue of homelessness. At each and every one of these 22 town halls, I always receive questions from you, the citizens of Oakland, about how the city is grappling with this moral outrage of homelessness. We know that homelessness is a tremendous equity issue, with racial disparities in who is impacted most by homelessness, but also who not only is suffering from the impacts of gentrification and housing instability, income instability and disparity, but also which neighborhoods are being impacted by the unintended health and safety consequences of street encampments. Oakland is trying so hard with compassion and determination to reconcile the very complicated problems of homelessness and its impacts on both our beloved unsheltered residents and the housed residents that live near them. We have incredible leaders to offer to you this evening. Our administrator of homelessness in the city of Oakland, Mr. Dariel Dunstan, our council member, who is also the chair of the Life Enrichment Committee, Lauren Taylor, who has authored encampment management policy that came in front of the Life Enrichment Committee recently and will be coming to the full city council for a vote in just a matter of weeks. And then finally, Joey Harrison, executive director of Village of Love, an incredible human being that works so compassionately with our unsheltered neighbors. And I want to give a special shout out to the Temescal Bid, Shifra, and all the wonderful people that are really working to very effectively reach out to our unsheltered neighbors and help in a very compassionate and dignified way navigate the conflicts between that particular commercial district and the honored unsheltered residents that are also call that district home. With that, I remind you that we will have a quick update on what's going on in Oakland, particularly over the last couple of weeks, and that we invite you to share your comments and your questions at any time through the Thought Exchange platform. But let's start with our update this week. If you can cue up my slides. All right, big news with the COVID-19 pandemic, good positive news, which is that Alameda County has been moved from the purple to the red tier. That means our risk factors are going down. And we also heard exciting announcements today by Alameda County that over the next week or 2 weeks, there may be additional activities that will be allowed. We expect as early as October 9th that hotels and lodging for tourism may be allowed. Museums, zoos, and aquariums. And I have a special announcement about one of my favorite outdoor attractions in Oakland coming up. Personal care services, libraries, gyms, and fitness centers, all with special safety protocols and reduced capacity, but these may be allowed to reopen as soon as October 9th. And then another big announcement from the state for the red tier that as of October 13th, elementary schools may be allowed to open if they meet special protocols and of course with approval of the districts. Please stay tuned to the Oakland Unified website if you, like me, have public school students. I believe that we shall be expecting to keep those students in distance learning through the end of this calendar year, but stay tuned on the district's website for any updates. Next slide. Yes, Children's Fairyland is coming back. For those of you with small children that love this incredible Oakland institution, October 3rd, Fairyland will be reopening safely for our littlest Oaklanders. This magical place will require you to reserve your attendance online at their website. So please go to fairyland.org for more information and details. And big thanks to famous Oaklanders David Diggs and Rafael Casals, the stars and creators of Blind Spotting, that just did a wonderful fundraiser for Children's Fairyland last week. Next slide. The next, Umoja Health Pop-Up Testing. We are excited for you all to visit UnitedInHealthOakland.org. Again, UnitedInHealthOakland.org to find out about these free, easy, confidential testing events in Oakland. This Saturday, October 3rd, you can just walk up near West Oakland BART from 9 to 4 p.m. this Saturday. And on Sunday the 4th, we're going to be having a walk-up testing event at 31st and MLK in North Oakland. So again, Saturday near West Oakland BART and Sunday at 31st and MLK. Please get tested. Next slide. Happy news this week. Oakland got a big $20 million for 2 of our home key projects. This is going to allow us to convert a former California College of Arts dormitory in the Rock Ridge, as well as 20 single-family homes throughout Oakland to house permanently our formerly homeless neighbors. Also, the Rock Ridge location will include a family transitional shelter. All told, this will be about 165 units of permanently affordable housing for our formerly homeless in wonderful neighborhoods of opportunity. We're so grateful to Governor Gavin Newsom for the Project Home Key program. We still have 2 projects on the waiting list, so we're hoping that we may even get more. Next slide. And Alameda County also got good news this week that they are going to be able to purchase the Comfort Inn near the Oakland airport. And that will provide 104 units of new permanent housing. They'll be converting this favorite hotel into permanent housing to make sure that those that we've been able to shelter during the COVID-19 pandemic can actually remain permanently affordably housed in these locations. Next slide. Also, next week is one of the last weeks to apply for 2 special grant programs that the City Council funded through our federal CARES Act dollars. There is $4 million in grants for small business owners, and also $1.4 million for individual artists and nonprofits. You can go to oaklandca.gov/CARES Act to get connected to those applications. Again, both of those grant programs, next week is the last week to apply. But next week is not the last week to apply if you need one-time assistance for your rent or your mortgage payment. There is $5 million that our Oakland City Council has allocated to help tenants and homeowners that are struggling because of income loss due to COVID-19. So please find out more at oaklandca.gov/CARES Act. Our partners at Keep Oakland Housed and HERA are going to be helping Oakland renters and homeowners get through this together. Next slide. I don't know about you, but if you watch that presidential debate, I personally feel more motivated than ever to get involved in this election. One of the most important things that you can do is have a plan to vote. You and anybody in the United States can go to iwillvote.com. iwillvote.com to find out everything you need to know about voting by mail, voting early. We want everyone to have a plan to vote. I also recommend, if you want to encourage people in other parts of the country to vote, nonpartisan, I'm allowed to talk about it on this, It's called voteforward.org. And it allows people to write letters to other voters that might not be frequent voters to encourage them to get out this November. There is so much on the ballot. Next slide. All right, as we hear from our great speakers tonight, I know that Oakland has lots of questions about how we are grappling with homelessness. So to get your question or comment heard, and we share them all exactly as they're written on the screen, you can text 787-725-330 to the number 72855. Or you can just click or scan the icon on your social media feed. We want to hear from you. Your questions, your interactions during these live virtual town halls are really important to us. And so with that, I would love to have our very first guest tonight. We're going to hear first from Council Member Lauren Taylor. He represents District 6, which is Central East Oakland. He's going to give us an overview, both personally and professionally, about why he cares so much about having a clearer and better policy for how Oakland can manage encampments. So Councilmember Taylor, thank you so much for your leadership, chairing the Life Enrichment Committee, as well as all the amazing work. You have worked on this for months to really try and strike that careful balance between all the complex issues that are at play as we try and compassionately and in dignity support our unsheltered residents, as well as address the very real health and safety needs of all residents in Oakland. Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Schaaf. It is an honor to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation because it's one that is on the hearts and minds of so many Oaklanders. I want to start just by describing why this topic is so important to me. It is a personal one. As a third generation Oaklander, I have seen so many of my family members that I grew up with displaced out of the city. More than half, I would say, that I grew up with no longer live here. Some moved to Antioch, forced to Pittsburgh, Vallejo, Fairfield, out of state. But others even still are struggling with homelessness, some right here in Oakland. And so when we talk about homelessness, I'm not coming from a theoretical perspective. I'm not coming from the standpoint of an elected official trying to get a headline. This is a real problem that we have to solve, and we need to move the needle on so that we can support all of our residents moving to stable long-term housing and to achieving a much more full potential of their lives. And so with that, I think I center this conversation to my cousin who, after my grandmother passed away, no longer had that safety net of a long-term family home that, regardless of what might else have been going on, she was able to come back to and have a roof over her head. And now that's not the case. So we do need to act and do something. When even before I was an elected official, I had similar questions to what I hear from so many Oakland residents. Why aren't we doing something about homelessness? I look around and I see the evidence of what appears to be not much being done, not much consideration. If we are doing things, why are things getting worse, or do they seem like they're getting worse? Why are we only focused on encampments and not focused on long-term housing? Why are we only focused on long-term housing and not prevention? And why are we focused on prevention but not supporting those in the encampments? From your vantage point, it's hard to see what is going on and how it all fits together. And this was the challenge that I had as the chair of our Life Enrichment Committee, being a former management consultant and engineer who's used to sort of taking big problems and working through them, digesting them. I would see these policies come forward very piecemeal. I'd see these budget requests come forward very piecemeal. We're spending money on this. We're spending dollars on that. We're responding to this emergency, et cetera. But there wasn't an overarching strategy that I could really sort of wrap my arms around. And so the Life Enrichment Committee, as the lead in addressing homelessness challenges for the city, really focused on how can we establish that clear path towards eliminating homelessness. What we refer to as the permanent access to housing, the PATH strategy, around how we actually address homelessness across the entire continuum, from prevention, keeping folks from entering homelessness, through the emergency sort of crisis response of those who are unhoused and need support in order to make it through to where we can then start to invest in long-term sustainable housing that's affordable and meets folks where they are. And so I was grateful that staff, through a number of iterations, was able to bring forward the PATH strategy and the PATH plan that actually helped to crystallize a lot of that, the big picture of how all these things fit together. Also within that strategy, it helped us to think about, okay, well, within that, how do we address these needs, knowing that we don't have all the dollars immediately and we don't have the capacity to build out housing for the 4,000 unhoused residents that live in Oakland. We can't build that number of units overnight, but how do we get there and transition to that? Also, as new dollars come in, how do we direct those dollars in a way that makes sure that we deliver on that direction that we intended? While tonight is not about the PATH plan, I wanted to acknowledge that there is a broader sort of picture strategy that we as a council adopted and have directed staff to work towards in that direction. Today, within that continuum from prevention to long-term sustainable housing, we are focused on the encampment management. So how are we supporting our crisis, the emergency crisis response support for those unhoused who, until we can establish enough housing for everyone, unfortunately, we are going to have encampments, and we need to figure out how we can live with our housed and our unhoused neighbors in a way where we are promoting the health and safety of everyone. And so with that, after we established the PATH plan, we had to figure out sort of now we need to dig deeper into the different sections. And so knowing how much challenges we're facing as a community, as a city, when it comes to homeless encampments, we recognize that there was a lack of sort of established citywide policy on how we move forward. I'm grateful that our city administration and staff had come up with an administrative policy, but because that wasn't established by the policy making body of the city council, there was the lack of clarity, uncertainty relative to how we were going to move forward. Not everyone was necessarily on the same page, and there was a lot of, I would say, reactiveness and responding to the loudest voice, the loudest call for help or support in this scenario. And so in January, we set out to really bring that clarity, bring a full engagement of the broader Oakland community in that process of developing a citywide policy around managing encampments. And so we asked our staff to guide a deep community engagement process, reaching out to the various communities that have different needs, different concerns that need to be balanced, working with our community partners who are on the ground, partnering with our unhoused residents and really engaging in that way, working with the business owners, those in various parts of the city, knowing that Oakland is not homogeneous, also anchoring specifically in equity and knowing that homelessness impacts our Black residents significantly, disproportionately more so than others. And so grateful for the staff having gone and conducted a thorough engagement and outreach putting their own sort of understanding and experience to get to the table so that we can have a policy to deliberate amongst the Life Enrichment Committee and then amongst the full council so that we can establish the clarity, the consistency for the city as a whole. And so with that, I wanted to just sort of express that appreciation while acknowledging that this is a very difficult, contentious topic and subject. Nobody wants to have encampments within our city. This is not something that we want, but we recognize it's something that we are stuck with, unfortunately, in the interim, and we need to figure out how to support, provide the opportunities for unhoused residents to gain long-term housing, while at the same time in making sure that we look out for the health, safety, long-term thriving that each of our residents should be open to and have available to them, so that we don't have the violence that might occur, the vulnerability of our unhoused residents when they are in encampments, the fires that so many people are aware of that break out in encampments, the outbreaks, the infestations of rodents that we have found, the pollution of waterways, lack of access to basic public infrastructure like sidewalks, playgrounds. All of these things we wanted to bring together in a way that we can address, knowing that we have folks on either side that will not be completely satisfied, but we are neighbors to each other and need to be good neighbors and figure out how to support each other through this crisis. And so because of that, those are the reasons why we are here, is to bring that consistency, that clarity, and that leadership to how we manage encampments, recognizing that that is just one of several interventions that are needed to move us along the right path. And so with that framing and appreciation, I just want to thank everyone who has signed on to be a part of this dialogue. I want to acknowledge that we are in the midst of this policy development, review, refinement, and approval. Last week at our Life Enrichment Committee meeting, we approved moving this forward to the full council for full council deliberation and review and eventual approval, targeted towards October 20th. So the October 20th council meeting, I invite everyone to join us then for that council meeting, where the full council will review, deliberate, refine, and hopefully provide that leadership and guidance that you guys have elected us to provide as we lead this city through this crisis. With that, I will sort of end my initial comments and allow the next guest to speak, and then look forward to Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Taylor. We appreciate so much your leadership and your willingness to really engage in this complex issue. Remind us again when the item is coming to the City Council meeting.
City Council meeting on October 20th. That's Tuesday. 1:30 p.m. is when the council meetings begin, and we will be sending out more information as the links for that meeting are available.
All right, October 20th, mark your calendars, and due to the special rules in effect because of COVID, you can participate on Zoom. We also just posted a link to the City of Oakland's PATH plan. That is our plan and strategy to end homelessness. And let's just be clear, our very first priority is ending homelessness. At the end of the day, everyone deserves a place to sleep at night, knowing that there will be a roof over their head, food on their table. That is what we all strive for and believe everyone is deserving of. And what we are talking about tonight is not our permanent housing strategies, not our homelessness prevention strategies, but specifically how we are trying to balance the very real health and safety concerns of encampments, both for those living in the encampments and those living around the encampments. And I have got to tell you that the city of Oakland is so blessed to have an incredible professional heading up this effort. Daryl Dunstan is filling a relatively new position with the city of Oakland as homelessness administrator. And Daryl, you have done an amazing job. On top of being in charge of homelessness for the city of Oakland, no small feat, Daryl has also played a critical role in our emergency operations center, dealing with all the logistics that are involved with grappling with this pandemic. So Daryl, I just want to personally thank you for what an incredible worker you've been, how much you bring to the city every day. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you the answers to all the questions that Oaklanders have about how we are managing encampments. Daryl.
Yeah, no pressure, right? Good evening, Oakland. And thank you, Mayor Schaaf, Councilmember Taylor, and Director Harrison for the opportunity to join you tonight. And for those of you all who don't know me, my name is Daryl Dunstan. I completed my undergraduate studies at the University of Virginia and my graduate work over at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. Completed both degrees while working full-time. And as the mayor mentioned, I was recently appointed homelessness administrator here in the city of Oakland. So I've held the position for approximately 100 days. And in that time, I've visited over 50 encampments, both large and small, from District 1 to District 7. I've engaged encampment residents one-on-one, spoken with longtime Oakland homeowners, small business owners, and advocates. I've listened intently to everyone. And I wasn't listening as a bureaucrat with preconceived notions, pretending that I have all the answers, but rather as a fellow human being who could relate in some fashion or form to the concerns that were being raised by both housed and unhoused residents. I know firsthand what it means to couch surf and to live in a vehicle, or to have to summon the fortitude necessary to simply make it to the next day. I didn't always have stable housing growing up. I know what it feels like to go to bed hungry, to lack access to clean water, to be awakened by the chill of the night, and to sleep with my head on a swivel. I also know what it means to be a homeowner, and through my wife, a small business owner. More importantly, I know what it means to be a parent, and the unshakable desire to leave them a better world. This homelessness crisis intersects all facets of life, and it predates me and my predecessor. This is a crisis that disproportionately impacts people who look like me, manifesting itself predominantly in neighborhoods that decades ago were disenfranchised by design. So addressing this crisis, mitigating its negative impacts at the macro and micro level is deeply personal to me. And this is the lens through which I approach this important work. This policy isn't a magic bullet, nor will it solve the regional housing and poverty crisis that undergirds the homelessness crisis here in Oakland. But in my humble opinion, it is a step in the right direction. So with that said, let's unpack the policy a bit. Next slide, please. So as Mayor Schaaf and Councilmember Taylor mentioned, this policy is one aspect of the PATH framework that was adopted by City Council in December of 2019. So it is a part of a continuum, but we will only be focusing specifically tonight on this policy. So what's the purpose of this policy? It's to manage the adverse impacts of homeless encampments by balancing the interests of all residents, focusing encampment interventions on mitigating negative outcomes as they pertain to public safety and public health outcomes. And so this policy aims to do three things specifically. Designate high and low sensitivity areas, which I'm going to unpack in the next few slides. Determine findings that prompt city intervention. And it aims to provide guidance on addressing unreasonable health and safety hazards. Next slide, please. So what is a high sensitivity area? We are proposing that these areas are locations where the health and safety impacts of homelessness are heightened due to the potential degradation of critical city infrastructure and or the presence of significant obstructions to residences, businesses, emergency routes, and rights of way. Many of you all are well aware that we have encampments that are completely obstructing sidewalks, completely obstructing lanes of traffic, that is threatening, some of our bridges and our historical landmarks. This policy aims to address those adverse impacts. Next slide, please. So what are the areas that we are proposing should be considered high sensitivity zones, high sensitivity areas? They are these bullet points right here, okay? So we're talking about all vehicular traffic lanes and bike lanes. We're talking about sidewalks that have obstructed ADA access points and a means for emergency response. We're talking about within 150 feet of a school, 50 feet within a protected waterway or a residence or a business, 50 feet of a playground or a tot lot, public park, and the areas that are directly adjacent to our emergency shelter interventions. Next slide, please. And so for all areas outside of, those bullet points that I just outlined, again, within 150 feet of a school, 50 feet of a person's home or a business or a park, right, directly adjacent to an emergency shelter intervention. Outside of those zones, we are proposing that we deem these areas low sensitivity areas, which essentially means deprioritizing enforcement. And what we'd like to establish is in these low sensitivity areas, just a basic standard of living, right? And so what am I talking about? We're talking about limiting an encampment to one side of the street. That way pedestrians are able to walk on the opposite side of the street. We're talking about maintaining defensible space between encampments, right? We've had an increase in encampment fires, and the biggest concern is, what the fire service calls extension. So one tent or one structure catches on fire, and when you have no defensible space between that tent or structure and another tent or structure, that entire row can go up rather quickly, again, threatening life, threatening property. We're talking about maintaining AD access points, right? Many sidewalks are completely blocking wheelchair ramps and things that folks rely on to be able to travel. We're talking about compliance with applicable and generally enforced state penal codes and local ordinances. What are we saying here? What we're saying is that we like to distinguish between legitimate criminal activity, irrespective of a person's housing status, while not criminalizing a person just for being homeless, just for their situation, right? It is making that distinction. In many of the encampments, we are not experiencing a homelessness issue per se, right? These are encampments that we regularly send outreach teams to. We regularly make offers of service to that are declined, yet there is heavy narcotics trafficking. There are heavy human trafficking. There are reports of or service calls for arson or for assault, right? So this specifically is saying that if folks are engaging in activity that generally would be enforced, irrespective of their housing status, that we want to maintain that same level of public safety within our encampments. And again, I'm hearing this directly from folks that are living in encampments. These are people that are telling me, and again, I've mentioned this earlier, right? Having to sleep with their head on a swivel, right? Or sleeping with one eye open. People living in encampments are fearing for their own safety. And so we have a responsibility to protect them as well as our housed neighbors. And then finally, in accordance with CDC guidelines, trying to maintain, a 12 by 12 square foot area, if you will, per person. So we're not getting these large encampments, right, that are unmanageable, that are creating some of these more egregious public safety and public health issues. Next slide, please. We also want to address some of the negative impacts of folks that are dwelling in vehicles. Again, not to criminalize anyone from sleeping in a vehicle, but to say, right, we have safe parking programs. We like to get you in one of those. To say, hey, it doesn't do you or your neighbors any good when you dump that gray and black water into the storm drain, onto the street. To address the illegal electrical taps that are occurring, right? We've got street lights that are out. We've got traffic lights that are out due to these illegal electrical taps. And so again, taking the broad perspective, right? Everyone's public safety is jeopardized when these things occur. The storage of tires, generators, propane tanks, other combustible materials. Again, these threaten folks that are living in the encampments. And then I had already spoken about maintaining that defensible space. Next slide, please. So a word on how the city may or may not intervene. The recommendation is that for encampments that are located in high sensitivity areas, and again, that was a short bullet list that I went through very quickly, within 150 feet of a school, directly outside of an emergency intervention, within 50 feet of a residence, business, park, playground, things of that nature. Encampments just in those areas, right, would be prioritized for an intervention for closure unless they have prior city council approval to operate as a managed or a sanctioned encampment. And the policy goes into depth about what that means. And it also includes an appendix that could guide the city toward implementing co-governed encampments. So that takes us to the encampments that are in low sensitivity areas. So as long as those encampments are maintaining those standards that I just previously outlined, there's no reason for a city intervention. However, for encampments that maybe aren't meeting some of those standards, right? Maybe we go in and we find some public safety or public health findings. The first intervention is not to cite, it's not to arrest, it's not to close the encampment. No, the first step is to send outreach there to see if they can engage residents at that encampment, work with them to gain voluntary compliance. Something as literal as the encampment's on two sides of the street, right? So maybe we send an outreach team there to say to the folks on the opposite side of the street where everyone had agreed that folks would not be, to say, hey, let's move over across the street. We're here to help out with that move, right? If that's ineffective, then maybe we go to the first level of intervention, which is a health and hygiene intervention, right? It's when the encampment management team assesses a particular site and says, we've sent outreach out, outreach has been unsuccessful. Maybe this site could benefit from some regular waste collection. Again, resources allowing. Maybe this site can benefit from some portable toilets or hand washing stations. Maybe this site can benefit from not outreach visiting once a week, but maybe 2 or 3 times per week, right? That would be the first level of intervention. Let's say we do that and we're still we're still having issues with some public safety and public health findings. Maybe we go to the next level of intervention, which is a deep cleaning. That's when we'll bring in the heavy equipment, the street sweepers, the power washers, and we would ask the residents of that encampment to temporarily, right? And when I say temporarily, I'm talking 4 to 6 hours, that temporarily just leave, take whatever belongings they need for that time period, but to just vacate that location so we can get the heavy equipment in there, work with them to make sure we're not disposing of any of their personal belongings that they do not want discarded. But again, getting in there with the heavy equipment, disposing of the tons of waste that may have accumulated, power washing the streets, street sweeping, things of that nature. So let's say, well, maybe we've done a health and hygiene intervention and we've done a deep cleaning, but we're still experiencing some of these more egregious public safety and public health findings. So the next level may be the recommendation may be a partial closure. So maybe the entire site doesn't need to be closed, but maybe there's just one section of the encampment that maybe abuts a person's home, for example, or is blocking a critical ADA access point. So maybe the need is to just conduct a partial closure just in that area, right? But the rest of the encampment can remain where it is. And then there are going to be cases where the public safety, the public health findings are so egregious that a full closure will be warranted, not only to protect house residents or businesses, but more importantly, to protect those who are living in the encampment. The one example I give is the East 12th Street median. We've had numerous fires at this site. We had one just a few days ago, and I am deeply concerned, especially having been a firefighter and an EMT. I am deeply concerned about the number of fires that are occurring at this encampment and the threat specifically to the people that are living in that encampment. And so that would be a situation where maybe we go through these other interventions, yet we're still experiencing these really high level threats. The recommendation may be that the full closure is for everyone's benefit. But again, we would weigh heavily when that is warranted. And I can't be clear enough, next slide please, around this policy is not intended to oppress folks, to burden them any more than they already are, having to live out on the street. But what it is trying to do, it's trying to strike that balance to just establish basic standards that would afford folks living in that encampment and the surrounding neighborhood just some peace of mind. Okay, so what does this policy do? It emphasizes public safety and public health considerations. It leads with services, leads with compassion, leads with empathy, and I'll have it no other way. And it establishes encampment standards. Next slide, please. What does the policy not do? This policy does not criminalize a person for their housing status. There is no language in this policy that is recommending that anyone be cited or arrested solely for the status of being homeless, nor is that something that I will ever support. It does not close encampments without due process or proper noticing. If we do need to effect a closure, there will be a ramp up to closure, at least 4 weeks, right? It's typically 4 to 6 weeks. And within that 4 to 6 weeks, intense outreach, intense offers for service, and really trying to match folks with programs that meet their needs, right? And then the day of the closure, yes, it's going to be hard for some folks that have declined services. But the idea is that we would have done our due diligence well in advance of a closure, so we're not leaving people without options. At the end of the day, though, it's important for people to understand people have the autonomy to choose for themselves whether or not they want to accept services, right? And so sometimes it's this narrative that the city is not offering services, is not providing services. The flip side of that is that a person has the ability to decline, to say thanks but no thanks. And then finally, this policy does not deny services, and that's what I was speaking to the unsheltered population. So that is the end of my presentation, but I am happy after the next panelist gives his presentation to field any questions that folks may have. Thank you, Mayor Schaaf, for the time.
Oh, Mr. Dunston, thank you so much. You did a great job of explaining how we're working so hard to balance these complex issues, but always leading with compassion. So thank you for that. And I did post to the chat an actual link to the proposed policy. I know it's a little long. Maybe we could find a newspaper article that summarizes it a little more succinctly, but this is complicated stuff. We are having lots of steps and communication and services as part of this proposed policy. I will speak for myself. I support this policy. I believe that the work that Mr. Dunston has done Councilmember Taylor has done with surveys, with tremendous input, with tremendous thought, looking at national best practices and holding Oakland to a higher standard than any city. I really commend you for this policy that will help everyone understand how we are managing health and safety while protecting our unsheltered residents. Someone who is an expert in that is our next speaker. Mr. Joey Harrison is the Executive Director of Village of Love, a wonderful organization. Mr. Harrison, thank you for sharing with us your own lived experience and also how you do the hard work of managing to get our unsheltered neighbors into services, to connect them in ways that helps minimize health and safety concerns, both for themselves as well as the communities that they live in. So please, Mr. Harrison, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for inviting me. And also thank you, I want to say thank you for Dariel and council member that went before me. So I wanted to talk a little bit, start off, tell you how I got here and what encouraged me to do this work that is so needed in our community. One, I'm from Oakland. I am born and raised Oakland. And so I have had my struggles with housing. I've bounced from couch to couch, lived in my car, and the struggles I've had, the struggles at that time when I was going through that, when you're out there in the streets, you're trying to survive day to day. And it's hard to just even survive to the next day, let alone try to get through the process of getting into services that you would need. So I was thankful, I was grateful to have someone that came into my life that kind of mentored me through and pulled me back, got me to where I needed to be. And through that, I went to school and got my life went to school and dedicated my life to this cause. And so to talk a little bit about what I do, so I am the operation manager of the Temescal District. And so there we do have ambassadors. And also let me say, I really want to thank Temescal and Shifra and the district for trusting my vision and trusting my leadership to do the work that I'm doing in the district of Temescal. And so we have ambassadors. We have 2.5 miles here in the district that I oversee, and 5 miles of sidewalks. So what I would see with my experience with the unsheltered, I would see a lot of times the police would get called if you're sitting in front of a business or doing anything. And so I was able, due to my schooling and previous work, facilitating groups with those that are suffering with mental health and substance abuse. So to go back on that, I did work with an organization. We piloted, it was a pilot program in East Oakland, and we worked with the psychiatrists, their case managers, their nurse. And so a lot of our clients, I saw how just establishing the relationship with our clients, how they were able to have that trust with us and able to get started. We were able to reach them where other services couldn't reach them. So most of our clients were in boarding cares or transitional housing. So I noticed that when I started working within the bid, and I noticed that our unsheltered, I said that's the same kind of service that they could use. So I'm really, really about building the community, about us coming together. And so I started off by, I still do de-escalation trainings for the district, for the businesses and the residents, and teaching them how to compassionately and respectfully work with those that are experiencing homelessness. And so I started doing those. I do those quarterly here in the district. And I also thoroughly trained the team as they're cleaning and doing their daily routes within the district. They have contact with our unsheltered residents every day, all day, right? So I do a lot of training with them and training them on how to work with our unsheltered and just establish that relationship that a lot of times is when you're out there, sometimes you want somebody to talk to. And so we was able to get in and start establishing relationships. We started suppers and showers, and that was an idea I had because it is the shower truck. Lava May had partnered with us, and we had a food truck come out. And I said, well, I want this to be for a community building. So I put it out to the neighborhood in the district, and I requested that anybody that live and work in the district come and volunteer. Because what that does is once you feed you give a person food, you sit down and actually get to know the person versus walking by. That starts to build community, and that's what it did. So that's the purpose of the suppers and showers. So then I started the unsheltered support group. So a group once a week that we meet and we discuss. It gives our unsheltered a voice, give them a lot of trauma and things that has happened to them in the evenings and things that it gives them somebody who really from the heart cares and that can listen to them. And like a lot of them have my cell phone number and will call me because I would think I always put myself in that position. And I say, if I'm out there in the streets and you have nobody to trust, nobody you can call on and nobody to trust, it just to have somebody you can reach out and talk to every now and then is very important. And I know when I was going through my housing insecurities, having that was super important. And so my mind started really focusing on how can we build a community? What can I do to help build this? Make it more of a community for our housed and our unhoused. So, like I said, we started doing the de-escalation training. That's quarterly. We do that, and we started hosting the suppers and showers, and then the unsheltered support group. So as these things start taking off, we also hand out hygiene kits. We give out lunches at times throughout the day. And just to be there. And so from that, I got actually another contract in Alameda, and I opened a day center over there. And through that day, and at that day center, I have a day center and a safe parking program. And at the day center, I have a shuttle that goes throughout the city and bring our unsheltered to the day center. We have like 3 or 4 different support groups. We have a full staff of peer support. We have a nurse practitioner that comes once a week. They have showers, lunch, breakfast, and the idea is to be more like a family, not clinical. I say guest. I don't like to say client. I say this is our guest. And when everyone come in, we welcome them as this is your home. And so to say the funding that I have, that was in Alameda as a HEAP grant. What I do, I am the operation manager here, so a small portion of my pay goes to the outreach, but I do a lot of stuff on the unsheltered support group. I take a lot of my pay and put into that. To do that, we get a lot of donations from the community. And so we're opening a day center here in Temescal. And so what I've seen, and just due to COVID, we have a lot of our unsheltered that are out there that are unable to go inside of the restaurants, inside of the coffee shops, and so they don't have nowhere to seek refuge. And so we're looking to open in 2 weeks, and it's a place where they can come in that's theirs, and not just any place, but a place is like really clean, well kept, a place of love where you come in and you feel like family. You feel this is yours. So through that, like I said, that will start in 2 weeks from now, and we're super excited about that because our unsheltered definitely need somewhere where they can seek refuge. We have, we actually started it in Alameda. We're starting it here at the day center. I'm starting a group called You Are Not Alone. And it's for family members who have children, adult children, whatever age, that are suffering with mental health issues, and some are homeless. And sometimes we don't know how to relate to them. So what I do is we started this group so that, because I get a lot of calls. I talk to anybody that knows me, tell you I work constantly because I love what I do. So it's not work. I love it. And so it's definitely a need. And so I have families that call me because they don't know how to get through the system. Like, I have my child, I don't know what to do, and they're doing this, and they don't know how to relate to them, and they end up getting burned out. The family get burned out, and then they end up on the street, right? And so, I started the group so that they can have support, and they know that you are not alone. And the same thing that you're going through, somebody else went through and probably is overcoming. So there's that aspect to the Village of Love of what we do. Like I said, the unsheltered support group, we have housing. A big thing about with the housing, and the big thing about our support group is that sometimes when people even if you get placed in housing, sometimes you lose the skills to be the little things to do to sustain the housing. So, and you'll begin to self-sabotage. So what we do is we tell them continue coming back to the group once you get housed. Continue coming. So if they start self-sabotaging or different things, then we can recognize it. And I refer to the program as like Big Brother, Big Sister. When I was a kid growing up, you had the Big Brothers or the Big Sister program that help you navigate through life. And so this is how I formatted this, the Village of Love, is that it's about love. It's about helping your neighbor. It's about building your neighborhood, about building the community. And so we're again super excited about the day center that will be starting in Temescal. The one in Alameda is going really well. And so I'm taking on some of the things that we do there and youth and applying it over here. We have a van that will take our unsheltered to services. So what we try to do is, versus you have to go through all this alone, we try to do everything we can to help you through this process. And then if you say, hey, I have an appointment over here, we have a van that we take them. Come on, let's go. And we give you a ride, or we give them a ride to where they need to go. And I partner with a lot of different organizations throughout the Bay Area. And it makes it easier to place in housing, to do these different things. But the key to me is establishing the relationship. That is the first thing. When we come at it, we don't come at them promising the world. We don't say we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. We tell them to come in, sit down and watch TV with us, or here, would you like something to eat? We establish a relationship first, and then ask them, how can we help you? We don't tell them this is what you need, we're gonna do this. The goal for me is, and I tell my team regularly, establish a rapport, a relationship, and see what they need and how we can best help them.
Joey, that's so beautiful. That's beautiful what you're doing. Joey, if people want to get involved and help your organization, do you have a website or a Facebook page or anything?
Yes, I do have a slide. My apologies. Can we put the slide up? Okay, this is the last. This is one of the slides. We can go to the next one. Together we can make change. We need coins. We don't need coins, we need change. Yes. And the next slide, you can see our information. We can go to the next one. And that's our PayPal. That is where you can reach us at, and that is the website.
All right, Joey, thank you so much. I am sure that people will have some questions for you about your amazing work. That is the kind of love and care we want to give as part of this policy and how we are all taking care of everybody here in the city of Oakland. We'll put up the slide for thought exchange one more time, but I understand we already have 52 questions. 52 questions have already been submitted about this hot topic, which we know Oaklanders care so much about. And I know I speak for so many where we want to be compassionate. We know the solution to homelessness is housing. But while we wait to address that housing crisis, how do we compassionately and effectively address health and safety concerns, both for our unsheltered and their neighbors? So again, please text 787-725-330 to the number 72855. But I know we've got plenty of questions to start with. Staff, are you ready to put some of these screens up already while we wait for additional questions? If not, Darielle, I know that you received some questions ahead of time. Were there some that you would like to address now?
Yeah, there's one in particular, Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity. There was a recent report about a death in one of our programs, Operation Home Base down there on Hagenberger. That's the site where we program those travel trailers that we receive from the state. And there was a bit of inaccurate reporting, and so I'd just like to clear the air. The reporting was that the person had passed away due to a heat stroke. And actually, a person did pass away, but it was not due to a heat stroke. That person, my understanding is they did experience a stroke, but it was unrelated to the heat. The first responders confirmed that was the case. I met with staff at the site, also with the executive director of that service provider. My understanding is that particular trailer did not lose power. And again, I just wanted to clear the air that that was not a heat-related death that occurred one Sunday.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that, Darielle. And just kudos to our staff who, over a year and a half have doubled our shelter capacity with some very innovative models that have frankly helped us not spread COVID-19. We've been far more fortunate than neighboring jurisdictions as far as keeping our unsheltered communities healthy in our safe RV parks, our cabin communities, and of course our newest intervention out by the Coliseum of the RV park, Operation Home Base, which has been fantastic. All right, I understand that the staff is ready to share some of these questions. We want to hear from you, City of Oakland. Get your questions and comments out there. This is supposed to be interactive, so please, if staff can put it up. All right. I think a number of these are going to, I'm going to give Darielle the first one, and Councilmember Taylor, get ready to take the second one, although Darielle, you can also address that as well. How have you engaged people who are currently living at encampments? Darielle, I know you are out every day talking to these Oakland residents. Can you talk about how that's going on?
Yes, as you mentioned, Mayor, I make it a point to be on the ground, to engage folks that are living in encampments. I am out in the field at least 2 times per week. And especially when we're conducting some of these larger operations, I am on scene. And every time I'm at an encampment, I make it a point to talk to every resident at that encampment, to understand what their story is, to understand what their needs are. And so, yes, in the development of this policy, those conversations, many conversations, hundreds of conversations, influenced a lot of the different things that are being proposed within this policy. And as far as a concrete plan and timeline to clean the streets and remove encampments in our city. As Councilmember Taylor mentioned in his opening remarks, we are not in a position where we are going to quote unquote eradicate encampments in Oakland. Mayor Schaaf, you so eloquently stated the solution to homelessness is housing, right? And so until we build deeply affordable housing units, for folks that have no income to up to 20% AMI, which is going to take some time. In the interim, we've got to do a better job of managing folks that are living in encampments on the street. And so, yes, we have a concrete plan. And the timeline, should this policy be adopted on the 20th, it becomes effective upon adoption. And so, yes, there is going to be some time to be able to assess what encampments are in the high sensitivity areas, to rank those encampments in priority order, if you will, depending on magnitude of public safety or public health threats. But staff is prepared upon adoption to begin execution of this policy. So we're not talking, months after the fact. We're talking weeks.
Thank you. And Councilmember Taylor, do you want to add something about, how we are approaching a timeline, and also just the fact that we are trying to prioritize rapid creation of permanently affordable housing in existing housing stock. The 20 single-family homes that received Project Home Key funding are already starting to be occupied right now. In fact, we expect everything to be off and running by the end of this calendar year. We are trying to act very quickly. But Councilmember Taylor, please talk about how the timeline works and why you believe that this policy is absolutely not criminalizing the unhoused.
Absolutely. So first, I'd like to begin by extending my condolences to the family of Leon. I know that was his name, at the home base site. I also, similar to Dariel, made it a point to stop by the home base site the day after the death occurred to check in and really just make sure that I was able to lay eyes on what was happening, what was actually accurate on the ground. And so, and unfortunately, his wife was not there when I visited, but obviously she was being supported by family. But I do extend my condolences. As far as implementing I would say the first thing, just to acknowledge that same question relative to, well, how do we move forward? What is the plan relative to once we approve to implementing and executing? That question came up in our Life Enrichment Committee meeting. We, all of those who were there expressed sort of their thoughts, concerns, and making sure that we do it appropriately with enough notice, engagement, and by prioritizing those sites that are requiring the most, I would say, support. That being said, I know that part of the supplemental report coming forward on the 20th will also include a description of that implementation plan. And so when that is published 10 days in advance, that'll be available for the public to review. But it is something that we are focused on, making sure that as we move forward implementing, that we are considering the needs of all involved in a similar way. As far as how we make sure that we are not criminalizing homelessness, that, as Dariel mentioned, the focus is not on criminalizing the fact of being unhoused and not having a home. It's also a matter of clarifying that when an illegal act occurs, that because of your housed status, that doesn't make it a hands-off interaction. We are still enforcing those laws that do require enforcement and impact the health, safety of others and other neighbors with that.
And Mayor, if I may, Mayor, I'm sorry. And those crimes that Councilmember Taylor is alluding to, we're talking about homicide, aggravated assault, human trafficking, narcotics trafficking. These are the crimes we're talking about. We're not talking about petty crimes. And then also, it's a supplemental item, so I believe it's 3 days, sir.
Oh, got it. We will make sure to get that out as soon as it's available.
And Mr. Harrison, I wanted to ask you, there's a question about mental health services. And as a direct person who's doing outreach and knowing that mental health services are generally not provided by the city of Oakland, but by Alameda County, what are the mental health services available to our unsheltered residents?
So there are several programs out here, and that cater more to it. You know, that you have like BACS that does a lot within the community. So there are services out here, providers that specify specifically in working with the mental health aspect of it. We try to do more on our end. We do the community building and the one-on-one, trying to and we work with we work with providers. So we do a lot of referrals.
Great. Thank you for providing that. I know we always need more, and that is a big conversation I think we all are having about where we invest in the conditions of safety. Yes, Mr.
Mayor, if I can add, one of the aspects related to addressing mental health, related to addressing crime, is this aspect, as you were, I think, alluding, reimagining safety in Oakland. And so as in parallel with this effort, we within the city have taken a very aggressive, proactive approach to reimagining what it means to create safe communities, to create safe neighborhoods within Oakland, and making sure that public safety is not a parallel or is not a synonym with police. A gun and a badge showing up to solve and address every situation where someone is in need of support. So as we are going through that process, we have established the task force to reimagine public safety that is moving forward. We have a number of advisory boards, approximately 140 residents of Oakland from across the city, varied backgrounds, experiences, demographics, are coming together to really roll up sleeves and figure out how we support a new way of thinking about public safety. That involves alternatives to police response when it comes to mental health. It involves alternatives to police response when it comes to engaging and supporting our homeless encampments and addressing those issues that don't require police. And so I think that is also part of the answer relative to how we are not criminalizing unhoused, but bringing the appropriate resources to bear when there are issues that arise.
Great. And I want to quickly address the questions about East Oakland. I want to say again, the housing that just got approved for funding, permanent housing for formerly homeless, is not in East Oakland. It is in Rockridge. I mean, in the heart of Rockridge, half a mile from the Rockridge BART station. And the other single family homes are in single family home neighborhoods sprinkled throughout the city from North Oakland to Central to East. And so we are very cognizant of trying to put this form deeply affordable housing into neighborhoods of opportunity. East Oakland has had a tremendous burden on it, and so that is a very intentional piece of how the city is approaching this. It is true that the county is purchasing one of the hotels near the Oakland airport, the Comfort Inn, but all of the city's permanent affordable housing for formerly homeless are actually outside of East Oakland. And I'm sure Councilmember Taylor also has opinions about how we're trying to really think about equity as we both address homelessness, which is an equity issue, as well as the impacts. Here's some more questions. Thank you for continuing to scroll, people. I think Mr. Dunstan answered the question about the crimes that we are occasionally finding. And just again, very clearly, this policy does not allow citing or arresting people. It is all about services and assistance, as well as helping direct people into areas that are going to be the least impactful. So how is this not a response to complaints of the gentry who have homes and not punishment? You're forcing this upon an unwilling, disenfranchised population and further alienating us. Any of you feel free to respond to that as we scroll up a little bit more on the questions.
Yeah, I can jump in. I just don't see it that way from my vantage point, and I understand how someone may read it that way, but as you just stated, Mayor, this policy it leads with service, it leads with compassion, but it is trying to strike that balance to establish some basic standards to maintain the public safety, to maintain public health. And so, no, we are not recommending that folks be cited or arrested. Again, those high sensitivity areas are clearly defined, right? And I think it's important to mention that when the citywide survey was conducted, Councilmember Taylor would know that exact date, but the recommendations coming out of that survey actually suggested greater distances, right? So it suggested 500 feet within a school. It suggested 300 feet within a business or a residence, right? So this was an attempt to balance, both sides, to say that, 500 feet within a school is unreasonable. However, there is an argument to be made that an encampment that is adjacent to a school can be disruptive. And so that happy median, that suggestion that we put before council was 150 feet. Now they have the discretion to either extend that or to reduce it. But again, just to start the conversation, the recommendation was 150 feet and then the 50 feet for those other distances. And so I do not see this policy as punishing the unsheltered population. And again, just me being personally invested in this population, I just can't bring myself to willingly, punish someone solely for their housing status, right? I wouldn't be able to sleep at night.
Mr. Dunstan.
One thing I'd like to add on top of that relative to engaging our unhoused residents and their perspective. I think it's important to recognize that not one person can speak for all the unhoused residents. And so we attempted to get out there and make sure that we heard from a number of folks who are unhoused as we did this survey, and not just go to housed residents. Similarly, I know that our outreach workers were engaging with those who are unhoused as well. And so in the survey that we conducted with approximately more than 800 responses, we had almost 14% of the responses coming from those who were either unhoused or formerly unhoused. And that percentage is significantly higher than the percentage that are represented in Oakland, and the amount of unhoused residents versus housed residents in Oakland. And so one of the things that we found is that from those who responded, those unhoused residents versus housed residents, we asked the same question around whether they oppose having encampments allowed in certain locations, i.e. bike lanes, driveways, near schools, in medians and residential zones. And in all but one of the locations, the unhoused residents opposed more so than the housed residents. And so it's important to acknowledge that aspect of we did, and there's a link to a summary of that survey that we can put online as well. But I want to just reemphasize that there's not a monolith relative to unhoused populations in terms of that perspective. And we attempted to get much more broader in terms of the outreach, the voice that was coming back in terms of that outreach and engagement.
Thank you, Councilmember Taylor, and thank you for making such a good effort to capture the voices of our unsheltered residents in your survey process that I know led to this proposed policy. Mr. Dunstan, I think you're the expert in this. There's a question about minimum requirements, and certainly Boise, the case that came down, has created some very clear legal requirements. The city of Oakland is expert on that because we've been sued, I think, at least 4 times, although we've prevailed in each and every one of those cases as meeting legal requirements. But explain what kind of compliance we're doing, especially with CDC guidelines, and how we have worked to ensure that our shelter options do actually offer places where people can bring their belongings, and how we are trying to really meet the needs and make our shelter offers attractive to our unsheltered residents.
Absolutely, Mayor. So to your first point about how we've had to adjust some of our approaches due to COVID, we have decompressed our shelters, if you will, to provide for that CDC compliant spacing within our brick and mortar shelters, within our community cabins programs, within our transitional housing programs, and worked very intentionally with our service providers to make sure that we were meeting those CDC guidelines. And so in addition to that, you mentioned Martin v. Boise, and which basically, you know, in a nutshell, I am not an attorney, but in layman's terms, it says that you cannot criminalize someone simply for their unsheltered status, right? So just because a person is sitting, lying, or sleeping on a park bench or on the street, that you can't cite or arrest that person simply for that. And so what it says is that and the March 27th resolution that City Council passed, it says, staff, if you all conduct a closure operation, you need to offer alternative housing or an individual housing unit that's CDC compliant. And if you cannot do these things, then you shall not close the encampment. And so we have been, you know, very targeted and intentional about meeting that standard. And any closures that have been conducted, and there have been very few, but the closures that we have had to conduct were due to you know, a building, if you will, that was slated to be demolished, and you had an encampment right in front of the building. Essentially, they were in a collapse zone of the building. And so it was in the residents that lived in that encampment's best interest to move them outside of the collapse zone, right? And so, yes, we did, you know, by the technical definition, conduct a closure. But in that scenario, that closure looked like us assisting folks move literally 10 yards, right, outside of the collapse zone, you know, so the contractor could come in there and put up the fencing that was necessary to maintain public safety. But even while we did that, we made shelter offers, right? So we said, hey, we've reserved, there were 5 individuals that were impacted by this. We reserved 5 spaces in our system, and we made those offers. They declined all of those offers, but again, we didn't even affect a true closure. We assisted those folks to relocate, you know, like I said, several yards outside of that collapse zone. And so, just to wrap up, there are minimum standards that we have to meet before we take actions, and we have in no way, shape, or form try to circumvent those standards, nor will we in the future.
You know, you've kind of touched on this, so I'm going to quick ask you if there's anything you want to add to answer a very good question, which is what specifically happens to people who do not relocate when told that they are in an area that is forbidden under the policy. I think you've described that, which is we actually help people relocate. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that question specifically?
No, you hit the nail on the head. We work with them. Sometimes we're out there, you know, 8 hours on end, negotiating and really just working with them to try to help them understand that we are there to help and that the situation could be beneficial to them should they accept those services. Yeah. But it's a conversation, and you know, we'll continue to have that conversation.
Mr. Harrison, I wanted to kind of follow up on that with you, and also this question about, what do we do when people refuse assistance? There are many people with mental health issues who often are going to refuse offers of help, offers of shelter. What in your experience has worked the best to work with those individuals?
With me, what have worked is patience. I've had people who have refused because they don't trust, and they think you're going to come and promise them the world, and it's not going to come through. So they already have this wall built up. So what I do is come in and establish the relationship with them. And my skill set was developing a relationship with those that others see hard to develop that rapport with. And I've been able to house some of those people, and to get them into housing because I built that relationship of trust. So that's what we've done. That's what, and this again, it's not an overnight. It doesn't just happen quickly. Some people will think that you can go out there, say a few words, and you're gonna get them in housing, but it just doesn't work like that. When you're, you are dealing with the substance abuse, you're dealing with just the mental health aspects, you're dealing with, they're not trusting. All these things, a lot of barriers we have to break through, and it takes a lot of patience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And that's part of why we are very intentional about using trusted organizations to do our outreach. And that is not who gets used for the deep cleaning or even the relocation assistance. We really are trying to establish those relationships of trust.
And Merritt, if I may, that's also why we have a ramp up to closure, right? Understanding that it takes several conversations and to build that trust, to build that rapport. And that's why we try to schedule closures if there's not an imminent public safety or public health risk 4 to 6 weeks in advance. That gives you that runway, right, to constantly engage that person to build that trust.
Councilmember Taylor, there's a question about the impact on East Oakland, and I know you have opinions about that. There's a concern that the restrictions being put in place don't allow for adequate places, and there's a feeling that we're intending to make East Oakland into the next Tenderloin, and that this lower income neighborhood already has to deal with the brunt of homeless housing. So do you want to address that concern as the representative of part of East Oakland?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I emphasized when I first began this conversation is that one of the things we're going for here is clarity and consistency with respect to this policy in terms of what is and is not sort of allowed, where we will prioritize or deprioritize enforcement. And when we look at the requirements in terms of those bullets that Darielle read out, in terms of distance from schools, distance from a residence, distance from the business entrance, those requirements are consistent across the entire city, and so that's not a requirement in one place versus another. One of the things that is important also, and I know I hear from my residents all the time, is that there seems to be a lack of real standards in terms of what does or what doesn't exist. I would say the policy that we're proposing will help to establish and allow for execution or implementation of those standards in a way that will address the majority of the calls that come into my office for District 6 specifically. The question about, well, will East Oakland become a dumping ground or become the Tenderloin? I think the reality is that it has been a place where we have borne the brunt and a majority of the RVs that have been coming in, a majority of the sort of the encampments that have been in some of our industrial zones and sort of taken over spots. What we are focused on is making sure that the support for our unhoused residents is equitable across the entire city. That's one of the things we looked at. One of the things that our Department of Race and Equity really focused on is making sure, like with this policy and how we implement it, making sure that those who have traditionally been underserved, under-resourced, those red line districts of our city are not bearing that brunt. That is a very clear focus as this policy was being developed. And I guess I would emphasize the other aspect is that this encampment management policy has to work in the context of the other measures and interventions that are being put in place. So as the mayor described, we were able to direct millions of dollars, almost $20 million towards creating places for our unhoused residents to go in Rockridge, in District 1. We were able to now look at ways that we can spread that load, identify. I think one of the things that the Life Enrichment Committee and the council is looking at is how we can designate spaces in every district that can support our unhoused residents in terms of identified co-governed encampments. And so as we move forward with the other aspects of the policy, in addition to the encampment management policy and the path framework, then we will absolutely be looking at that equity to distribute so that we're all supporting this transition towards our ultimate goal of no homelessness in Oakland.
Well, Councilmember Taylor, that is a pretty beautiful place to end. I want to note that it is 7:30. Thank you for addressing a little bit the issue of cars, which is a very good question. I always find it interesting that 45% of our unsheltered residents are living in cars, vans, or RVs. So a huge growth in that particular mode of living unsheltered right now. But what I'd like to do is ask each one of you just to give some parting thoughts as we sign off this town hall and invite everybody to come and participate on October 20th when the city council takes up this policy. And I'll start in the order that we went in. Mr. Dunstan, if you could just leave us with some parting thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. One, I just want to thank you, Mayor, and my fellow panelists just for the opportunity to join and to speak. And really just my parting words would be that folks read the policy, right? And if there are specific areas that can be strengthened, that you absolutely let us know about that. You can email me, email the council office, but read it with an open mind. Read it from the lens of that we're not trying to criminalize folks for their housing status. But it really was drafted from a genuine place to address the growing public safety and public health issues that we're experiencing throughout the city related to homeless encampments. And yes, there are probably areas that can be strengthened, but read it with an open mind. And again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank
you. Councilmember Taylor.
Yes, I wanted to similarly echo my appreciation to those here on the panel in this conversation. I want to specifically appreciate the City of Oakland staff who are working tirelessly to support all of our residents, our housed and unhoused residents, with all of the challenges that we face, from the illegal dumping and constant fighting of blight, the homelessness, supporting our homelessness, the violence that has crept up recently. I just want to acknowledge the amount of intensity that has picked up even more so since the beginning of COVID-19, and just thank the City of Oakland staff for those efforts. To do nothing is not an option. We can't simply sit here and pretend as though this is going to go away. We have to be aggressive. We have to look at the big picture and strategically guide our process. It's convenient and easy for us to pass the buck and say, oh, well, no, we're not going to decide this because it's too tough and it's not going to satisfy everyone. But the reality is, I know for me, that's why my district put me in office, is to help us get through these difficult, complex challenges. And that's what we are attempting to do with this policy. We are in a very difficult situation where we don't want homeless encampments in our city. We want everyone to be housed. Everyone deserves to be housed and should be housed. And we have a path towards that. We are working to continue to build that out and refine it. And in the interim, until we have the housing for everyone, we're going to have to support our housed and unhoused residents to live as good neighbors with each other, to support each other, our health, our safety, and our ability to thrive within our city. And so I'm look forward to the conversation on the 20th. Look forward to everyone participating and moving that forward as we address the multitude of levers to get us where we're trying to go.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Taylor, for all your leadership and all your work. Mr. Joey Harrison, please bring us home.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor, for inviting me, and thank you to my fellow panelists, to Council Member, to Darielle. I thank you so much, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And what I just want to say to everyone is, let's get out. This is what we could do to help our unsheltered. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of things, a lot of people out there that's really doing good work. Let's get out there. This is our city. I love Oakland. This is my home. Let's get out there and help, take care of yourselves, and let's take care of each other, of our housed and our unhoused. It's about community, and we need to come together.
Oh, thank you for that beautiful message of love and community. I also want to express my deep appreciation for all the panelists. Thank you, Councilmember Taylor. I think you said it well. The status quo is not working. What we have now is not working for anyone. So thank you for trying to put together a policy that balances all the complex issues going on. I also want to give a special shout out to all the city staff. Special shout out to my staff that make these town halls possible, our awesome sauce interns, and Peter Radu from my office, who leads out our homelessness policy work. Just everybody in the city. You could not be blessed with more compassionate, hardworking, dedicated public servants than we have here in the city of Oakland. And with that, we will see you all in 2 weeks, where I think we're going to be talking about the upcoming election and the different measures that are on your ballot. I like to say, equity is on the ballot this year. What a year to vote like your life depends on it. So please join us in 2 weeks. Thank you for joining us tonight, and please show up. Your voice matters.